Hello, everybody, and welcome to this morning's second session of the Learning Technologies Autumn Forum. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Claire Doody, and I am your chair for this. I am coming to you from a very grey and rainy Dublin in Ireland. So do pop into the chat and let us know who's here, where you're coming from. Yeah, we'll be keeping an eye on the chat throughout the session. So in today's session, we're going to be exploring the pros and cons of AI and how we can harness the benefits of AI while also being very human-centric in our approach to talent and talent management. Our panelists today are Nathan Constantino, who is Sales Director at iAM Learning, and his experience straddles both talent acquisition and talent development. And he's really interested in the intersection of human concerns and technology concerns in this world of AI. And we also have Mehdi Tounzi, Senior Director for EMEA at Open Sesame, and he has a breadth of experience in the learning industry, and he's really going to be bringing his global perspective of the larger companies that he's working with and where he's really seeing the impact of AI in these organizations. Steph Charlesworth, our third panelist, is a customer delight manager. I love that title, with iAM Learning, and she's working with smaller to medium enterprise and seeing how they're working with AI and the things that they're running into. So it's going to be a really interactive session today and more chatty, not so much slides, more chat. Nathan is going to set the scene with a couple of slides, and then he's going to lead a conversation with Steph and Mehdi where they'll be tackling some of the pertinent questions on this topic. My job will be to keep an eye on the chat and the questions, so please use those panels, and I'll be jumping in throughout to surface some of the questions that you all have today. And so without further ado, I'd love to hand over to Nathan, who's going to lead us with some slides and set the scene. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. And as Claire rightly says, I'm coming to you from a very wet and windy Chester in the northwest of England. So I think we're all in the same boat there. Let's hope it doesn't sink. Right, okay, so we're going to talk to you, as Claire said, we're going to talk to you about the pros and cons of the AI revolution. And the AI revolution is really being coined as a phrase by lots of influencers online, and you can't really go on social media or LinkedIn for sure without seeing a reference to it. But what we're going to try and do today, between the three of us, hopefully, is we're going to try and cut through some of the bull, and we're going to try and bring it back into where people fit in. Because for me, and certainly for some of the panelists in the chat that we've had in leading up to this, people are the most important element. We're going to look at the role, if any, that L&D plays in all of this, and quite clearly there is a significant role that it should do. And what, if anything, should you be investing in as a company or organization to stay ahead of the curve, to stay present, or maybe you don't have to invest at all? I'll just move through the slides. So quite an important slide here. And we wanted to give some context, I think, around general knowledge and general understanding, really, of AI. So this is a McKinsey & Company survey that was pulled together across not a huge sample set, but I do feel it is indicative of a global footprint. But what you're looking at here is you're looking at a number of industries, and you're looking at their understanding of AI, and whether, if you're sat at this end, so in the grey boxes, whether you've got zero understanding of AI, zero contact in terms of AI, or no exposure to it at all. If you're at this end, so the darker blue, then actually you regularly use it for work. and you're regularly being asked to use it for work. Mehdi was just explaining before we came live on air that actually some organisations that he is talking to and working with, that actually there's directives around a more prevalent use of AI. But the interesting fact to me is actually the largest proportion is somewhere in between having no knowledge of it at all at this end and actually using it on a regular basis. So that kind of still tells me that there is, I guess, work to do in terms of understanding where it fits in. So narrative, I guess, around what we hear and coming back into what we see and hear on social media. Some of the pros and cons that get bounced around often. From, I guess, a scaremongering perspective, lack of transparency, bias, discrimination, our jobs are being taken. Actually, privacy and ethics and security. How are you going to guarantee that is handled well? And we don't really want to lose the human connection. That's super important. So I think when you hear about the negatives, you often hear about those elements. But from a more kind of positive or the other side of the coin, people often talk about, okay, well, this is great because you can automate lots of jobs, and what we can do is we can reduce human error. We can take massive data sets, okay, which from a human perspective is often quite difficult to manage, and it supports really strongly. It supports simplifying that process. So we're going to cover off and we're going to talk through some of those and really kind of dig deep around how they're viewed in organisations. But what's really important to remember is it's not independent of one another. So let's go back to the title. iAM robot, and human. Those two elements are not independent of one another. Actually, they're in my view, they're interdependent of one another. And those organizations that are harnessing people and technology, it should always be the most powerful combination in a workplace. And those organizations that harness that are those organizations that generally, through this period, are going to win. So what I'd like to do is open back up to our panelists, and we're going to discuss this in more detail, and hopefully we're going to bring some real life insights to you from some large enterprise customers with a global footprint, and we're also going to give some insights from a smaller customer set as well. And as Claire rightly said at the top of this, if there are questions or you'd like to make comments, then please drop them in the comments in the chat. And what we'll do is we'll be having a couple of breaks as we move through, just to kind of pull those in. So without further ado, big opening question, and I'm going to go to our man from France, and that is Mehdi. From your experience, Mehdi, can you provide some insights, let's say, as to how AI in your experience is being used in the L&D industry to advance things?
Okay, well, thanks, Nathan. I think you've already mentioned it, and I love the graph you shared with us, because I think there's a lot of that. There's organizations are either totally embracing it and pushing people to not use it. Other organizations maybe in more compliance-driven environment where they're like, Colin, until we've set clear guidelines around what you can and cannot share and in what context, then let's not touch it at all. And then you have the in between. So to answer your question, I think there's two parts. First of all is defining AI, and I would almost argue that everyone's been using AI. I mean, it's just an extension of like machine learning, and so whether you have Spotify, whether you have Netflix, and you get course recommendations, and that you have that already in learning. Most platforms nowadays should be able to make recommendation based on data that's been gathered around what learners are doing, what are the trends. You talk about the buzzwords. I mean, we're in the skills economy now. It's everything's about skills and skills taxonomy and being able to. So a lot of AI is currently used by multiple platforms to be able to make recommendation or identify specific skills that people should be developing. So to a certain extent, I don't think it's a case of if, but rather when. And then depending on what industry you're in, you decide, do we fully engage? Do we just leave it into a specific group? What I'm seeing a lot of is almost two different camps. On one hand, you have organizations that are investing in, from a learning standpoint, in educating their IT crowds around how do we develop AI-based tools for our own processes and whatever business we're in. And then the other camp is organizations that are looking at their business population, saying, how do we educate our people in understanding what AI is, but more importantly, how they can embed AI in being more performant or more productive in what they do on a daily basis. But I would argue that in both cases, it's still very early stages. And there's a lot of everything and anything out there. So it's again, it's not a question of if, but more a question of when. And then depending on the organization, the size, and to a certain extent, the geography, and we can talk about that later, the adoption is at different levels.
And just picking up on that point, thanks, Mehdi. And just picking up on that point from I guess from a geographical standpoint, then is there, and for the audience's benefit, Mehdi has a global footprint, and the organisation he works for has a global footprint, as many of you will know. But do you see regions in your travels and or industries, for that matter, that are kind of ahead of the curve or adopting it more in your experience?
So that's the very interesting thing, is because in terms of the adoption of AI, we're not seeing specific parts of the world where there's a higher adoption than others from that standpoint. But at the same time, if you use AI for learning, what is interesting to see is that the preferences in learning styles or format are very much dictated by the cultural aspect and where people are, and where you see, and without falling into like cliches, but personalization of your learning using AI to define that, for example, is something that's in higher demand in North America and Northern Europe, while Southern Europe, for example, in LATAM will be focusing more on collaborative learning, where there's a higher demand for that. There's not enough data to be able to say, is that just driven purely by culture, or there are other factors behind it? So we're seeing that. But when it comes to adoption, it really is not defined. The only interesting thing is that at global level, the only country as of today that has clearly put some criteria around the use of AI and regulations around AI is China. The EU is due to come out with the AI Act, I think in the next couple of weeks that will be out. But the only country that so far has defined the use of AI within their territory is China. I think Japan is not far out, but outside of that, no. So when it comes to the adoption, it's not driven by a specific culture, if you will. And then when it comes to industries, yes, obviously tech industries are far more investing far more in the use of AI than insurance and finance, because of some of the risks that are linked to that as well. But if you read the news, it was two stories, if I may mention, because I thought it was quite interesting. You might have read a few weeks ago, I think it was a Samsung employee that used AI and shared some code that he shouldn't have shared on one of those tools. So that obviously the repercussions are, quite bad for the organization. And then there's also a big bank, I want to say the US bank, but I wouldn't say for sure, that has made it forbidden for the employee to use AI at work. But they've seen a massive spike in people importing private emails into their work emails, because people would use their private emails to use AI and then simply import it into that. So that I thought that was quite funny and quite telling as well, that, people want to be able to save time and do things better. So there is some of that.
And we will come back to that, because I think that kind of hooks nicely into some of the ethical challenges and I guess challenges that are being faced not just by the organisation but also by the employees within an organisation. But what I'd like to do now is kind of come back down the customer portal, for want of a better expression, and bring Steph in to the conversation, because I think it's fair to say, Steph, in the role you do in the business, the organisations that you typically deal with on a day-to-day basis are perhaps not as advanced with regards to their plans around AI. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also fair to say that there's a lot of curiosity there. So, people are asking, oh, I'm excited to use it. I'm curious how it might fit. But I think given the size of the businesses, they're not perhaps quite, haven't got the cash ready to perhaps invest in the same way. Or like you say, Mehdi, sort of that idea of the culture, or where does it fit, or how does it fit? I think they're big questions at the minute. And I think when you're an L&D team of one person or two people, and you've got to deliver everything else as well, having that time to invest in that research, to look at how could it work for us, it does take a lot of time. And I think we're sort of at the beginning of that journey, as you say, and things like legislation coming down or guidance and ways of working will definitely help with that. And I think it's just we're just at that really exciting part of the conversation now, sort of saying, like, how can we make it work for us, or what do we want it to look like? And I think once some of the bigger companies and bigger industries have had those conversations and start sharing those ideas, we'll be able to sort of see a little bit more in terms of what we can adopt, what would work well in those smaller businesses, in those businesses where people are really pushed for time, so haven't got the capacity in the same way to invest.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that and this comes back into what we said at the top, which is we know it's there, it's prevalent, we see it, we hear it, we want to learn more about it. It's human nature. You have early adopters, or as we were saying in the green room before, it's often viewed as kind of Marmite. You either get involved or you don't get involved. But actually, it's okay in some circumstances for organisations to say, you know what, we're not ready for that, and our customer base isn't ready for that, or you know what, it's not adding value to the business at this moment in time for us to invest. So I think that is, a really important point. And in the organisation that we work in, and we're providing obviously learning to organisations, that it's there, but it's not being screamed for. I think it's fair to say, in terms of that educational piece. Now, that's not to say that that's not the situation in other organisations, because organisations are in far more technically advanced industries. But it's just interesting, I feel, to have those two different aspects, and you see it from those at the sharp end and at the forefront, and then you get those at who it's not yet on the radar. Yeah, so interestingly, coming back into some of those kind of ethical considerations then, and I think the three of us all agree, the human element, the people element, it has to be central. So what are your thoughts on that, the ethical element, the cultural element in regards to adopting it in a more forthright manner?
I think it's key to make it center of whatever it is that they're doing and whatever it is you're deciding, when you're implementing it. I think having some kind of transparency about how AI is being used. So are you using it to help craft emails? Are you using it to help build learning pathways? Are you using it to help, have conversations in the business, wherever that is? I think owning it and putting it out there and sort of saying, like, it's available for everybody to use, and this is how we're using it, and this is when we're not going to use it, and these are the reasons why, I think just makes it a really easy, transparent conversation then. So you're not sort of somebody going, oh, did they mean that, or is that just an AI thing, or am I being sort of fobbed off by an AI response kind of thing? But I think having that kind of open and transparent dialogue throughout, I think, is probably a key thing, I would say, because if we're going back to that human element, we know that human to human connection is there. And I think we've all had those chatbot experiences with customer service, haven't we, where we know that it's not a person there and they're not understanding us, and it's not the same level of response, is it? So I think being able to sort of really call it out from the beginning, this is what we're using it, this is when we're using it, this is how we're using it, I think is a really, really key part of it.
So put it front and center. Put it front and center. Yeah, transparent. Sorry, Maddie, go on.
No, I was going to say I agree with Steph, and I think it's. I mean, there's almost two levels, because from an ethics standpoint, you, in your intro, Nathan, you mentioned something important, because you talked about enhancing, and at the end of the day, AI is a tool, so it's not. It is up to us to use it as a tool and not rely on it to make decisions on our behalf. And I think that's where one of the risks lies, especially around ethics, because then you can end up pushing information or data that is not accurate. And we cannot assume that because it is AI driven, it is 100% real, because it doesn't function in the same way we do. Then when we win in the green room, it's always funny to say we win the green room. But prior to us starting yeah, it sounds good. Yeah, so we were in the green room. We didn't have any makeup though. But when we were discussing it, we talked also about the fact that at the end of the day, we're in the business of people. We learning is all about people. So I think that it's, to Steph's point, it's the end game is how is that going to help people. So the how will be maybe enhancing processes and using AI, and that's great. And that could be maybe using AI to be able to save a huge amount of time on sorting and understanding some of the issues, identifying the skills. But then you still need that human interaction to be able to say, okay, that's the specific context I'm in, and I'm able to fully understand that context from that standpoint. So ethics, and there's almost an EQ aspect to it that I don't think I don't, whether it's AI or whatever would come next, but any tool is not going to. It's not a case of either or. You have to have both, but you cannot rely. And we joked before, everyone, because I may or may not remember the early days of e-learning and how it was going to completely revolutionize the training world, as it was called back then. I've read about it I saw it on YouTube. I wasn't there. But the interesting thing about it is a lot of people, there was that expectation. It's technology driven. That's great. It's going to do everything, and now I can just rest, and magically it's going to impact people, and people are going to embrace learning, and obviously didn't deliver. And that's an understatement if there's ever been one. And I think the same thing is happening now. It can certainly help bring more. I mean, remember, we live in a day and age where that's it. We receive at our fingertip what we need in a format we need it, and that's what happens when we're outside of work. And then when we walk into work, however, all of a sudden we're told, no, you can't use this and you can't use that, and this is not good. But you still have to do what you need to do. And it's I think that's that divide that things like AI can help bridge and really help, but it doesn't change that at the end of the day it's all about people and for people, if that makes sense.
100%. Okay. Claire, I was just going to bring in the audience, if I may, and see if there's any questions online, or I can't actually see myself, so I was going to shout out to your good self, see if there's anything that we could kind of add to the discussion, or any questions that people would like to pose.
Sure. Yeah, we've got a huge amount of questions. I just see an observation here from Ian Gardner, and he's shared a link around the topics being discussed, good practice around AI adoption and organizational risk management. So that's something people might like to check out. For my own part, I'm curious, if we bring it down to the L&D manager, what ethical considerations, should they be thinking about, I suppose, explore the use? Is that something you can answer, or have you any insights on that?
So I'll jump in initially. I think it would be very much driven by the type of organization you work in and what industry you're in. And I mentioned earlier on, finance sector typically, or pharma, because they're compliance driven, there's a lot of restrictions in terms of what and how you can use AI, even from a learning standpoint, and what data points you will be able to use AI for. The other end of the scale, I guess, we're a tech company. Open Sesame is a tech company, and the week before last, I met with our CEO, and he was adamant that all and every one of us have to make sure that we use AI. We have a ChatGPT corporate license. We already have guidelines from our IT team in terms of how to use it. We've created an internal course on how to make sure that we do the right prompting and what info we can share. But we're being, heavily encouraged to make sure that we use it for literally everything from looking at our 9-grade and career development programs all the way to being able to sort through emails or data relating to users doing courses.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think if you're using data, especially from an L&D perspective, if you're sort of going through data and having a look at, what courses a learner's doing, using ChatGPT to perhaps identify gaps or identify trends that perhaps it would take you longer to do, or you perhaps wouldn't necessarily see, or you could get it to slice and dice the data in a different way. I think just remember the fact that behind the data there is people. So you're not sort of saying, oh, we're meeting quotas when we cut it this way, or we're looking at this, and just thinking about, okay, so if this data is coming up, or if these trends are coming up, what does that mean for the people in my business? What do I need to do differently? And just, I think, remembering that it's sort of just bringing it back to that again, back to that human. What is the so what behind the data, basically?
There has to be a check. Sorry, Claire, I was just going to say that there has to be a check and a check and a balance really around that, because on one hand what we have there is as I see it and as I hear it, is we have an organization that's really kind of positive. Yeah, let's adopt it, absolutely. And you assume, sometimes dangerous, but you assume, okay, those checks and those balances are there. The other hand, Steph, get your point, which is absolutely, let's remember there's a person behind it. But myself personally, out with some friends a couple of weeks ago, very small organization, friend who's an MD of that organization, using ChatGPT to pull together severance letters. Okay, so probably not the best use in that case. So I guess the real point there is, there has to be that check and balance, and there has to be always that point that comes back to an individual who does do that check and does do that balance. So yeah, just an important point to underline.
Thanks. I have one more question here from Lena Toomey, and her question is, what do you think about how AI can impact human skills? And she's specifically thinking about the Microsoft Copilot and how we use Excel, how we write, and so on.
I think this is a really exciting part of AI, because I think it's uncovering this whole new way of how we think about skills. And I think it's sort of that next iteration in the upskilling and that change of it. So I think when everybody got mobile phones and text speak became a thing, and it was really controversial to not use any vowels in your words. And now it's sort of kind of evolved again, and we use emojis all of the time. And I think, as humans, we are not necessarily that keen on change, but I think this is, again, that next example in terms of, okay, so if we're using AI to help enhance what we currently know, what skills do we perhaps need to look at next? And I think this is probably a really exciting part of this that L&D can fit into. So, go and talk to the various teams, think about, okay, so what if we're, speeding up pieces of work. I think a CIPD study did a study around all of this, and I think there was a 50% decrease in monotonous tasks when people were embracing AI. So there's a big gaps in the working day there. So what could we do differently? What can we think about in doing things that way? And I think if we're perhaps careful about how we do it and embrace it, there's perhaps jobs and things that we can't even fathom that will be appearing down the line in 12, 15 months' time.
Yeah, 100%. I got super excited when I first saw Copilot. And then I remember that we're not a Microsoft organization. So I was like, okay, we use Google, and Google launched Bard. And so I've been playing around with Bard, but Bard is not. So the promise of Copilot is super exciting because the main commodity that most people don't have is time. So anything that can help cut through a lot of the noise and the gazillion emails you get on a daily basis and sorting things, all those very mundane tasks, if that could be fully automated to really make you focus on what you're really good at and deliver, I think it's wonderful. And that applies for both. In fact, I would argue that it's part of learning. It's if I can embed that, if I can get a tool that would say, Mehdi, take that 10 minutes course on how to better reply to emails or whatever that might be, and that means I'm more performant. I think it's great. So I think that should be fully embraced.
I think as well.
Thank
Sorry,
you,
just to
Claire.
add to that. Sorry, Nathan. One more
Awesome.
thing. There's the idea of perhaps using AI perhaps to skill people who are coming into the workplace for the first time. So if you're perhaps having to train somebody to speak to customers, for example, or work in a particular way that works for your business, so you're perhaps training them, that you could use some kind of generative AI model in that way, and you're perhaps not then having to take somebody off their day-to-day, or it just creates that asynchronous way of working that sort of helps people get up and running in the ways that you need them to work in no time at all, really.
And we've seen elements of that, haven't we? I think over time, and it's developed. So I cast my mind back to Grammarly, when Grammarly was first introduced, and I think that was game changing for certain individuals, especially my own grammar, which was appalling. But yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an extension of that, isn't it? Which is there to aid. Okay, Claire, have we got room for one more, maybe?
I don't have any more questions at this point in time.
Okay.
So yeah, I have questions, and I'll keep I'll flag as new ones come in.
Okay, no problem. So we've spoken a lot there around the two ends of the spectrum. So a larger organisation, smaller organisation, perhaps it's not as prevalent, it's not on the radar as much. We've spoken about the ethics, okay, haven't we, and that cultural impact. But now, if we can, it'd be good to sort of delve a little bit deeper into maybe some specific examples that we're aware of where it's being used. So I guess the real important point is how it affects current job roles. So in your experiences, guys, that you've seen or you've read or you're aware of, in what ways have you seen specific job roles develop or evolve due to the integration of AI, and what I guess specifically has the organisation done to support the use of that within the context of their business? So I guess the question there is, how have job roles evolved, and how have organisations supported the person, the people, the employee in that process?
I'll jump in, and I'll slightly twist your question, but because I think it's a really good use of AI and I think it also matches the fact that there's a new demographic in the workplace, and Steph, you talked about earlier on about how people are reluctant to change, and yet change is the only constant. Same, the demographic of the workplace keeps on changing. So I'm seeing organizations using a skills approach to career development using AI, whereby I no longer am, I don't want to say stuck, but as an employee that starts into a job, I'm not necessarily limited to that specific job, but use AI to be able to first identify what set of skills I currently have and how I can reach mastery within the specific role I've been hired for, but use AI to be able to look at the organizational level. What are the, looking at succession planning or other opportunities of jobs, what skill set will be required for those jobs, and actually what people do we have within the organization that already have some of those skill set, and what they need to develop to be able to move, looking at internal mobility or transverse role or teams of teams, but really giving all of a sudden your career span within the organization a far more dynamic and exciting, I guess, spin. Because if I start as a product manager, then maybe within 3 years I'll be moving into a marketing role, and then maybe 2 or 3 years later I'll be moving into an ops role and whatever that. But almost reinventing oneself by acquiring new skills, and there's a notion of sometimes unlearning in order to relearn and or uplearn some existing skills, but so that you can really transform yourself as an individual, and all that driven by AI, whereby it's the AI that is going to identify, oh, hold on, Nathan, you already have that great set of skills. In your current role, you're only using part of the skills you have, not the others. So let's make sure that we can really capitalize on the fact that you have a nice set of skills, and maybe you can use some other skills you have in another job, and maybe you'll be interested by that. Maybe all of a sudden it's great because you're also reinventing yourself as an employee. So that's, for me, that's very exciting, and I'd like to think that that's heading in the right direction in terms of embedding the power of AI with learning and career development. And I would argue, I might be a tiny bit controversial here, but with the younger generations in the workplace, where after 6 months, where's my promotion? And after like 9 months, okay, someone moved to a new role. Organizations have to be more agile. And the reality is that if we try and do it the very traditional way we have, and with big, heavy competency frameworks and what have you, we're completely missing that opportunity, and you'd see your talent, going elsewhere. So I love the fact that can really help and push and attract talent and identify talent and help them grow within different roles within one organization.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that, Eddie. So I think the idea of going from, I don't know, this is my view. I think we'll be moving away from the role-based ways of working to skills-based ways of working, purely because of AI, doing those monotonous tasks, doing the stuff that sort of frees us up to be, the human thinkers, and the stuff that perhaps we couldn't get a machine to do. And I think, given how things can change, obviously we went through the pandemic, and lots of businesses had to really quickly change. And I think that it's only going to, as we move into those various, future ways of working, hybrid working, all of that kind of ways, the skills-based way, I think, is probably going to become more and more prevalent when people, peak more on their curiosity. So, I'm interested in checking this out a little bit. Let's follow that pathway for a little bit. Okay, I've done that. What next? And I think, to your point about the generations that are coming up, they are very much, if it doesn't serve me, what's next? And I think coming up with that skills matrix and looking in your business about how you can change people's roles quite quickly by offering those kinds of upskilling and reskilling and having those open conversations around it, all sort of with AI to support and help, and to get people paired up or doing tasks or learning through using AI in various forms, I think is the way it's going to go.
I think it's it's really exciting that in this day and age that we don't have to refer back to a multiple choice cognition emotional intelligence test. That's come on massively, hasn't it, in the last 10-15 years, and even more so in the last 24 months. I think back to when I was at school, and it was black and white, similar time to you, Mehdi, I'm sure.
No, I wasn't
that the way that you were aligned to a career was a multiple choice test, okay? And that was really kind of a rigid framework, and you filled out a few questions and answered a few questions around how what you were interested in. Do you like working inside, outside, etc.? We've come so far since those days, and Steph, you're absolutely right in that the organizations that are effective, the organizations that are productive, the organizations that attract top talent are those organizations that really kind of hone in on what good looks like from a skills perspective. Okay, and the dial has moved massively. Even from a talent acquisition point of view, how organisations hire now, they're really clear on the skills they want. And what's really exciting about, I think, a lot of the technology, and this is technology and people working in tandem, is that you can identify those skills. Okay, and you can identify those skills in large-scale recruitment campaigns that remove a heck of a lot of the subjectivity in terms of hiring. Okay, so you're basing your decisions on data, which is a good thing. Okay, but there is a human element to it. So, and that's exactly the same concept, exactly the same methodology, Mehdi, coming back into what you were saying earlier, which is then, okay, we've invested time, we've invested resources, we've invested money around hiring top talent. We want to keep them now. Let's develop them.
And
so
actually,
for me,
if I may jump in, Nathan, sorry to interrupt, because so you spot on. World Economic Forum recently published like a top 10 skills and jobs for the future. And what was very interesting is, because I think it ties in nicely into the conversation we're having, is 8 out of the top 10 required people skills. They did not require, it was not about data analytics, it was about collaboration, it was about critical thinking, it was about emotional intelligence, it was about things that are fundamentally human, about people. And I love that. And if I may, because Steph, you said something around that I was very tempted to jump in, and then I thought I'm not going to be rude and interrupt, but you talked about how some of your customers, when it comes to AI, there's that curiosity. And for me, that's the key word, curiosity. I mean, you cannot having learning without curiosity is odd to me. It's like cooking without onions and garlic. It just doesn't make sense. How do you do it? I can't fathom that. But those crucial things that will help you as an organization to become a learning organization, that curiosity, how you foster that curiosity, it goes back to that human aspect of learning and what we do. So I love that intersection between the two, yet talent acquisition and career development, AI to be able to identify the skills. But what you need at the end of the day is still very much your people. Sorry, Nathan, I didn't mean to interrupt that much.
I love the fact that you bought, sorry, Claire, I was going to say, I love the fact Mehdi bought onions and garlic into this. This is tremendous.
Oh,
go on, Claire.
Representing, flying the French flag there. Yeah, there's some activity in the question form. So there's one that's close to my heart. From Tony Small, you rightly suggest AI is not about an us and them situation. What human skills and competencies do we need to develop and be better at as humans to ensure we interplay effectively with AI-driven tools, processes, and opportunities? And I feel it kind of hits on that curiosity conversation, but I think that's a really interesting question to explore.
I'll jump in here. So again, and I'm sure we can put the link later on, but World Economic Forum, their recent survey was looking at those top 10 skills that are required. And as I mentioned, 8 of the 10 were around things. So collaboration, critical thinking, adaptability, all those are you can't automate that. It's not. And then if I may, because we discussed it, Nathan, but one of my favorite case study when it comes to, I'll call it AI, it's big data, but it's the same thing, is the whole NFL case study. The American National Football League use big data to be able to draft players. So that's how, and they've been doing that for 20, 30 years maybe. Whole set of data points around every single kid that plays the game, and they know everything, and they're fairly accurate in being able to predict that's going to be a good player, that's going to be a mid-table player, and so on and so forth. And a few years ago, there was a coach that kept on saying, I've got a kid, he's got something special. The data said, it's going to be decent, but not so much. And he kept on saying that. And the way they draft players in the NFL is there's, I think, 5 rounds, and each round's got 399 picks. And then kids get picked to go for different teams. And that coach kept on saying, that kid's got something special. And yet the data was still indicating that he'd be average. The kid got picked not in the first round, not in the second round, not in the third round. In the 4th or 5th round, he was number 399, so essentially the last of the pick. The kid still is called Tom Brady, and he's the most awarded, decorated athlete, not even football athlete, in the history of sports. Period. Not more than a Michael Jordan, more than a Rafa in tennis, more than or Federer, more than any sportsman you can. And I love that story because I think it's great to have that big data or that AI as a tool, as an enhancer. But there are things that I think are more down to like what makes us human that data can't necessarily put its finger on. So I love the fact that there are still plenty of case studies out there that I think the potential we have as human, and I think being able to fully explore or develop the potential in each individual that works in your organization is down to like your human skills. It's not going to be down to automation.
Yeah, I
There's a long
think
way to
you've
get
hit the nail on the head there, Mehdi. I think just curiosity for me is that cornerstone again, and also I think having that emotional intelligence and having, it's the gut instinct, isn't it? It's the thing that you can't quite perhaps necessarily explain why you made that decision that you did, but you know it's the right one. And I don't think that that's something that we could ever teach AI. I think it's something that's inherently human in us that I think we need to perhaps spend time focusing on and spend time working on in that regard, that I think using AI to free up us to have those more perhaps conversations and doing things slightly differently in the workplace. And I think not being afraid to challenge how we work in the workplace either, to make space for this new way of thinking. And I think looking at bringing in that human element in that regard as well.
Potential. It's potential, isn't it? What you're talking about there is potential. You're talking about attitude. And I think being able to measure attitude currently using technology is a very, very difficult thing to do. That comes from spending time with an individual. That comes from seeing actions from an individual, and data will inform without a shadow of a doubt, and using technology to assess that kind of performance overall away from attitude. Yeah, great. But attitude and potential comes from my own personal perspective. It comes from the human element of it. So you bring those two elements together, and bringing it right the way back to I am robot, I'm human. Bringing those two elements together is key. So yeah, 100% agree with that. Great question. And great story, Maddie. Claire,
I have
any
another
more
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's one that's should be short for you all to answer. It's quite a direct question. Do you have any insights on how many organizations are creating policies or boards on the ethical use of AI? Is it too soon? Are you seeing like ethics committees in your client base or policies?
I'm happy to jump in. So yes, again, the spectrum is varied. So some organizations are still, we're going to wait for the EU or for the government to put a set of guidelines, and then we'll build ours on top of that. The organizations that have already jumped the gun, typically it's a collegial approach between the compliance folks, the IT folks, if there's any other kind of governance within the organization, to really sit down and establish, okay, the do's and don'ts of embedding or using AI, and with risk management embedded into that, in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think it's perhaps slightly too early for some of the customers that I work with, just from that size perspective. So they're cognizant of it, they're thinking about it, but in terms of actually getting pen on paper on what that looks like, I think they're perhaps being a little bit more cautious. Yeah,
and what I would say, just to add to that as well, is that the size of organisation that we typically serve versus a typical organisation for a large proportion of Medi's organisation's customers is they're aware of it, but it's not in any kind of strategic planning. And I think when we pull that kind of back into our own library that we develop that serves our market, It's there, it's on a roadmap, but it's not on a roadmap that's being produced today, tomorrow, next week. And that kind of tells us in our customer base that that demand isn't quite there yet, aside from all the benefits that we've discussed. So kind of really interesting that you've got those two different customer sets, really.
Great. I have two more questions from the audience. Nathan, you tell me, can we take?
Yeah, let's take them. Yeah, absolutely.
I think Claire,
you okay? That's
questions.
We seem to have lost you. Hopefully she'll be back.
Okay, so while we wait for Claire, if I may just bounce back on the NFL case study, because it's not just the NFL, and I just want to show again how it ties back to we in the business of people. So there's a I don't know if it's a psychological clinical experiment called the Pygmalion effect, and essentially the Pygmalion effect it's been documented throughout the 80s and 90s. Is just being able to demonstrate the power of vision. And Nathan, you talked about potential, and essentially the experiment is the specific experiment I read about was they took two teachers in a school, normal school, random kids. They divided the kids into two groups. They told one teacher those kids are extremely smart, they're great achiever. Told the other teacher that group of kids you have, they're not the smartest around. End of the school year, the group of kids where the teacher was told they were super smart, they had more than finished the program way before the end of the school year and had already started the following year. Then they did the same experiment with wielders, and they told two supervisors, you have a group of guys that know their craft inside out, they're really good at it. The other manager, they're not. So again, same thing. Those that, where the supervisor was told his group was a high-performing group, it turns out that they were a high-performing group, not because that, but because of him being able to, show them his vision of them being successful and fully tapping into their potential. Now, I'm using that example because you go and automate that. You go and use AI to do that. If AI tells me you're amazing, I mean, I believe I am amazing, but let's say if AI told me something different, the relation is not the same. The impact it would have on me, like having automation telling me, oh yes, you can do that. I don't know, you can jump off that cliff. Hell no, I'm not. I'm not going to be convinced by that automation. A human is more likely to convince me of doing that. And I think it goes back into that, you mentioned it, Nathan, but that potential, tapping into that potential and how that's still very much of a human thing.
Yeah, it's emotional intelligence as I see it. It is that ability to, as a leader, I guess, in that context, as a leader, to understand your team. And we've spoken a lot about collaboration being key to high performance in the modern workplace. But not only that, it's being able to identify amongst those team members, the best leaders understand their team, don't they? And they bring their team together. And from, I guess, a team member's point of view, it's them being able to act on that emotional intelligence. And fact, you just don't get that same level of connection. You do not get that same feel, I guess, is the right word for it, to feel that connection.
And if I may add to that, the interesting thing is, even when we look at the data, for example, what are some of the topics, hot topics? Big organization, they invest still to this day, the biggest topic in which they invest is leadership, and it's things like leading with empathy. It's not things like learning to use AI to better lead people. That's like I've not heard anyone say, we want to use AI to better lead our people or to better inspire our people or to have a high-performing organization, to be able to automate so that people can do the things they're good at in a more efficient way, 100%. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to managing people, leading people, AI has never been mentioned.
No, I think, yeah, some of the most popular topics that I'm getting asked about is still, we call them power skills. rather than soft skills. I prefer power skills, and it's about that the strategy, the stuff that comes with as you move up. It's those sort of nuances that you need to be aware of in a way that you perhaps just and building that up really.
Okay, so Claire's having a few technical difficulties, so I want to make sure that we at least acknowledge the questions that were asked for us, so I'll try and squeeze these in quickly. Okay, so here's one from Ray Christic. What would be the next stage in AI evolution? Can we foresee which way it would develop, or will something else enter the L&D arena? Knowledge in pills or brain stimulating implants? Quite an interesting question, that one. I don't know who wants to consider that, or
so I'm happy jumping in, and I don't think it will constantly improve itself. There's one I can't remember his name now. His name just escapes me. Former Google, the guy who was heading Google and came up with the interface for the iPhone, just launched a new. It's funny because his new venture is called Humane. That's the name of the company, and essentially it's a small device you wear like almost a label, for your tie. And what it does, it's having your own. I was going to say mum, but I love my mum with the dearest amount of respect. But it's whatever you do. So I need to call someone, or I'm getting a drink, and it's going to scan the barcode and tell me, well, maybe at the moment you're on a diet, so really you should not take that. So like, just drop it, or hold on, before you do that, you've been invited for lunch at that person. Let's call them now, and then rather than having a physical device, I'll just put my hand up, and it will automatically show me like a hologram, I guess, and it will be dialing that person. I'll be having a conversation with that. So it's enhancing things we do in a less physical way. And if you apply that to learning, I think it's exciting, because if you think of what we are already able to do using VR, in terms of having that immersive experience of learning, and now so I love Steph Power Skills. I think it's great. So things like diversity or coaching, and really having that fully immersive experience. So if we can use those tools even further to really better impact learners and impact that specific curve, which is rather than having to deal with the whole Ebbinghaus forgetting curve and having to have that repetition of the learning for that to impact your behavior, having that almost immediate impact to behavior by using those new tools, by identifying the specific things that I really need to improve or do better. So I think that's where it's heading. And for me, that's exciting, because it's just helping us better hone some of the skills we need to be able to do our jobs.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. I totally agree. I think it's that leaning into it is that next step. I think is the understanding that tech we've got and looking at AI and then leaning into it and starting to make the most out of it, I think is probably the next step.
Good. Okay, well, we are bang out of time, so thank you very much for listening in today. Steph, thank you very much, and Mehdi, thank you very much to yourself. That's been great, and I think we've bubbled some really interesting and thought-provoking points to the surface. So thanks everyone for listening, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.